From UFOs to psychic powers and government conspiracies, history is riddled with unexplained events. You can turn back now or learn the stuff they don't want you to know. A production of iHeartRadio.
Hello, welcome back to the show. My name is Matt.
My name is Noel.
They call me Ben. We're joined as always with our super producer, Paul Mission Control Decant. Most importantly, you are here. That makes this the stuff they don't want you to know worldwide, technically, because that's how podcasts work. Tonight's episode takes us around this vast globe of ours into a web of proven conspiracies, not conspiracy theories, proven conspiracies that have gone on for decades at the very least and are going to continue because they're mainly invisible for the vast majority of humans. I mean, we were talking about this a little bit off air, and Paul Rocket Launch Decant said, hang on, Freeport? Like in Tenet by Christopher Nolan?
Yeah, precisely. And like in, what was it, the last season of... what's that show about all the rich people based on the Fox News family? Succession.
Oh, right.
It's in billions. These Freeport things, they're popular.
It's a rich people thing. Quick question, though. Will understanding Freeports help me understand the plot of Tenet better or no?
No,
not really.
Okay, fair enough.
But you can read some excellent film theory and analysis on Tenet. I think Tenet's a 3-watch. I think by the third time, it either makes sense or you just sort of give up on the rompecabezas of it all. But like Freeports are interesting. Matt, to your note, in Succession, another work of fiction, they're described as, my father has some financial impressions. Which I thought was a cool euphemism. This is a sordid tale of billionaires and crime and fine art and stolen antiques, dirty money, trafficking, terrorist cartels, all gathered in a strange set of locations that are, in a very real sense, in a very literal sense, they are above the laws of the common and the poor. And it's strange that despite how expensive it is to get into these things, we still commonly call them free ports. I can't do the air quotes hard enough. Here are the facts.
I mean, you mentioned the idea of these euphemisms. What did you say? Like some economic impressions. Isn't the term Freeport essentially a euphemism in and of itself? It doesn't really mean what it seems like it should mean, right? Because they're very expensive, to participate in, right?
Yeah, for the private services offered at a lot of them, right? But they are free from molestation by the government of the country you're porting in.
I love describing rule of law as molestation.
Yeah,
right. Free from all these pesky rules that the common have to practice. There's sometimes called Freeport now is like a street name for a genre of what we call special economic zone. They can sometimes be called free economic zones or free territories or just free zones because there's not always a water port attached to these locations. And their goal overall is to encourage economic activity.
Well, for we mere mortals, wouldn't the closest thing to a free port that we can actually benefit from be like a duty-free shop?
In the U.S., they have government-designated zones.
Right, which are totally different and above board because it's this one's f***ing us.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. But the idea that the nature of your, or whatever, where this place exists, is it's sort of this liminal space, economically speaking. That's kind of what duty-free shops or zones are as well, where you can, if you have an international ticket, you can buy stuff without paying duty taxes on them, like things like liquor and perfume and whatever else they have at those places.
Yeah. But theoretically, correct me if I'm wrong here, guys, but my understanding is that these things are often set up so a big company can bring something like steel in, and they don't have to pay the tariffs and all the taxes on that raw steel they bring in. Then they can turn that steel in or near the Freeport into something new, and then export it from that free port. And then they pay the country, the Freeport's country, the taxes on exporting it.
Yeah, we'll get into that as well in tonight's episode. Yeah, like that's a perfect encapsulation of when it's supposed to work correctly. According to the revised Kyoto Convention of 2003, a free port is, quote, a part of a territory of a contracting party, which could be anyone, by the way, where any goods introduced are regarded as being outside of the territory of that country. So the import duties, the tariffs, the taxes, they don't count. It's kind of like another microcosm, since we've already said duty-free store, another microcosmic example of this would be if you are traveling internationally and you have a layover in a second country before you get to your destination country. You don't leave the airport, right? You just hang in the lounge, get, coffee or whatever, and you never have to clear customs. You can do that with things as well, especially if you're quite wealthy. I will say, in most cases, if you're a regular Joe Schmo traveling around.
So we're talking about like a night stay over? A couple hours?
Right. Yeah, any kind of layover. If you don't leave the airport, if you have to leave the airport and then come back or whatever, then I guess it resets.
I mean, with the stuff going into a free port, you just leave for a couple hours, right?
So yeah, in most cases, if you are human traveling, there is an implied agreement that you will only be at that airport or that liminal space, as we said, for a certain amount of time. This does not necessarily apply to the things. Originally, and we'll just summarize the history here so we can move on. Originally, a lot of, like, we see free ports evolve in step with the modern idea of the nation state, because, you look at things like the Ottoman Empire, for instance. They were a theocracy. However, they also liked money and they needed economic passage between the infidels and the Ottomans. And so they would have these specific areas where you could go as a merchant and you didn't have to, convert to Islam. A lot of empires did this. You also could ostensibly preserve your own identity within these limited spaces. That's one of the origins of free ports. And they were big in colonialism as well. Singapore, Hong Kong, St. Thomas in the Caribbean, they all had these things. And they mainly primarily evolved to help people pass customs, get away with customs. How would we describe customs? I think it's familiar to most people who've traveled.
Well, and I just wanted to point out too, I traveled internationally recently, and I hadn't for many, many years, and have, a few times in the last handful of years. But customs isn't the same as passport control, right? Like when you pass through into a new country and you go through that thing where you have this line of like windows and you have to show your passport, and you might get a stamp there as well, but that's not the same as customs, because it's not your destination. Your final destination is where you have to like declare what you may have brought that could be subject to these kinds of import-export duties, right?
Yeah, they're best to think of it as a Venn diagram. Today, clearing customs is usually colloquially took to mean the passport control, right? You're landing, hopefully you got your visa or whatever, and you have more than $10,000 US. You have to declare it at customs, which doesn't mean they're going to take it all the time. Most of the time, in fact. But the way it works is you present your passport, your other paperwork, you answer hopefully a few questions, you might get a little fun stamp, and then you go on your merry way. But the experience widely varies depending on any number of variables. So these factors could include things like your destination country, your point Z, your origin country. That's a huge one. What kind of passport you have. For any international travel nerds, right now, the number one best passport is Singapore. Wow. That gets you into the most places.
Huh. Interesting. I wouldn't have thought that. That's cool.
They got some free ports. They're down to clown. And, there's stuff that obviously you shouldn't bring with you that'll make trouble at customs, like heroin. Don't, spoiler, don't bring heroin with you abroad. In general, don't do heroin. But then there are other things that might surprise foreigners, like if you ever travel to a place and they have some pretty hard bans on different fruit or vegetables or animal products, like Australia, Hawaii's big for this. Hawaii enforces this on other residents of the United States just because of their unique ecosystem.
Certain types of maybe pork products that are processed in a certain way that is not permitted here in the United States, for example, like Iberico ham, or that is actually illegal to bring back from Spain, I was told by a butcher.
Oh,
I didn't know that.
Yeah, it has to do with the way it's processed and cured or something like that. I don't know exactly the specifics, but you are not allowed to travel back with it. And when you do end up in customs back in the U.S., there's a lot of signs about parasites with little cute infographics saying, be careful, don't bring back whatever, because it could be an invasive species and cause all kinds of chaos in the ecosystem of Atlanta.
And like raw milk with Canada and the U.S. border.
Exactly.
Yeah. I would just want to go back to something you have in the outline here, Ben. It's really interesting. Just mentioning Singapore as having like one of the best passports. It makes sense that you found Singapore was one of the early free ports. And I think for my understanding of Hong Kong's relationship between China and the rest of the world, it also is really interesting that it once was a free port early on, because it would make sense as almost a way to get into China or do dealing with China, or for China to do dealings with other countries back in the day. You could use Hong Kong as almost this, as you said, a liminal zone.
Almost up till 1999, I think, really is when the lease expired. And Singapore, of course, being an autocracy based at the Strait of Malacca, which they largely control. Look, so let's say you bring in more than 10 grand or whatever it is, or you got a valuable artifact. It belongs in a museum type stuff. You declare that at customs because you don't want to get in trouble. You want to be by the book. These things might not be technically illegal, but they'll invite some scrutiny that will almost certainly complicate your trip. So if we're a terrorist organization or a shadowy billionaire, how do we get around all this bureaucratic hubbub? The answer is simple. Put your stuff in places where laws don't apply. Find yourself a real-life Schrodinger's box. Your objects are physically present, but they are not considered to exist in the country in which they're stored. They're just in transit, on the way to somewhere else.
Loophole. Sorry, it just seems made up, doesn't it?
It's weird. It's like agreed upon individualized pirate bays or something, where everybody can sail in, stash your stuff.
It's like codified the opposite of object impermanence, where it's like, I don't see anything. Why? What? I don't see that. There's nothing there.
Are those blood diamonds? Yeah, but they're not here. Mm-hmm. These are not the blood diamonds you're looking for.
Who are all these guys with machine guns?
Hey, they're in transit.
They're fine.
Pump your brakes. Yeah. I mean, the first modern free ports were meant to prevent what you're describing, Matt, which is a really good point, double taxation. And in places with like VAT or value-added tax, this is a huge deal. So you could say, hey, we're a bunch of manufacturers in Australia. We got this machinery. It's going to go to the United Kingdom, but it has to make stops along the way. And if we use free ports, then we won't get taxed or tariffed at every single stop. Theoretically, this makes sense, and you need it for global business. But the boffins, the eggheads, the legal beagles quickly realized there is no time limit on this concept of being in transit. They're parking lots with no clock. You can deposit something. As a matter of fact, many people have, including stuff Nazis stole back in World War II. You could just deposit it in a free port, and then it'll appreciate indefinitely. Eventually, you can sell it, and depending on how you sell it, you never have to pay a dime of tax, or a pence, I should say.
Yeah.
So when you use the term like deposit, the implication there is that not all free ports involve water, right? Not all free ports involve a port per se, right?
Well, an airport is also
a
common
point.
one.
A port of call. That's right.
Not as common, but it's usually via sea or river or however you get ships through.
Geneva is landlocked, right? And they have the world's largest art collection because of their free port. Yep. It's not a museum you can go to. This is big stuff.
Do you mind if we just really quickly to talk about the raw material angle? Because I think it's just important for me to understand when I was thinking about this. countries want to have a ton of manufacturing in their country if they're like expensive goods, especially if the country's going to make a lot of money when those goods are sold. If that company altogether is going to be generating income tax in some way, or state tax, country tax, whatever it is.
Just economic activity.
They want these big companies that are manufacturing things to apply their goods essentially in their sales to the GDP of that country. So what they'll do is encourage a big company to come in and manufacture their stuff, let's say in the United States, and use this free port to bring in the raw materials so they don't have to pay all those tariffs and taxes on bringing in, let's say, steel from China or something like that. And then they manufacture their goods and then they send them out and then they pay their taxes.
Bypassing trade wars.
Exactly.
Almost altogether. Yeah.
But so it's weird. Like, you'd think a country like the US would want to have that company pay taxes twice or 3 times or 7 times or however many, what times they can get away with it. But ultimately, it's like, it means that every country pretty much that wants these big money players to be in their country to have these free ports and have that accessibility for companies to go under the radar like that.
Well, but guys, can I start a free port? How does one initiate the paperwork to begin establishing a free port?
I would say first you find a vulnerable post-EU archipelago and then promise their politicians a lot of kickbacks.
Yeah, okay, I see.
Really, any country that's in turmoil. Hop in and make some friends, and then have a bunch of capital.
Start an abusive financial relationship, which is, capitalism. But you're right. We'll get to this too. There are ways to do it, and a lot of it goes back to power accreting power, right? Fire makes friends. Wealth likes wealth. And that's a feedback loop that can be leveraged and has been. And look, there are legitimate uses. We're being very careful to say that. There are legitimate uses for these global hideaways, and they're often sold to the public under what we could call optimistic terms. The idea is, you're in Liverpool or Kinshasa, insert any country or city or municipality here, and the promise that the politicians and the businesses make is this is a source of job creation. Things have been kind of tough. We'll get you jobs in this neighborhood. We'll also have economic prosperity because all these businesses are going to be coming in here and they'll be free from that pesky regulation and taxation. And being free from taxes and regulations, well, that's the foundation for prosperity, right? This might be good for the rich, but it's also good for everyone.
Trickle down type stuff, right?
Horse and sparrow, yeah.
Well, and for every free port, you're looking at thousands, if not tens of thousands of jobs, like actual jobs, for as long as the free port exists. And that's another weird thing about them. They tend to pop up and then go away after a couple of decades or even years.
Depending, yeah. And how much of that is calculated like a pop-up restaurant and how much of that is the pendulum of public awareness swinging back?
There is a certain in the know-ness about it, isn't there? Like to even know where they are, what they are, and how to exploit them. You got to be in a certain echelon of humanity to tick all those boxes, right?
That's absolutely correct. Sure, it might be good for the rich, but it's also good for everyone. What if we told you there was more to the story? We're not going to. This is the end of the episode. Spoiler, nice. Kidding. Yeah, we'll take a break for some ads. Here's where it gets crazy. All right, you let people shenan once, they're going to shenan again, as the internet loves to say.
And is that an internet thing? I've never encountered that. That's cute. I like that.
There are quite a few very concerning opportunities for corruption, conspiracy, and crime in the world of free ports. First, the crime. There's a ton of it. There's so much of it. It's everywhere. I hate to say it. I would posit that you can, at any single free port in the world right now, you can find something sketchy going on, especially when we look at financial crimes, because now they've replaced banks.
Yeah, well, people love to shenan again and again and again when it comes to financial crimes, because as international banking started to find itself under the thumb of new regulations, because of governmental crackdowns worldwide on tax fraud, Freeports kind of slipped into that role of like offshore bank accounts, right?
100%. Yeah, tax avoidance, tax shelters, tax havens, all the hits, all the good ones. Tax avoidance is a legal thing. Tax avoidance is just the sort of the group term for the toolbox of stuff that theoretically anybody can do to minimize the amount that they have to give to the tax man. We've all felt the sting. It feels it feels fantastic when you're done with a return and you think, I'm not getting burned that bad.
Well, avoidance, though, is not inherently the same as fraud or necessarily illegal, right? You can employ certain loopholes, as we know very, very wealthy people tend to do, and be completely on the right side of the law by avoiding certain taxes, income tax.
100%. Look into IKEA's nonprofit.
And really quickly, guys, I know this is an episode for another day, but it just got me thinking, because you know me, I'm always complaining about not knowing where my tax money goes. But did you guys see Trump's kind of big move to maybe like get some people on his side, talking about eliminating the income tax and replacing it with tariffs, which, based on the quick and dirty analysis I read, would fundamentally shift the way kind of business is done. A lot of these types of situations would be included, but also just in general, it could really be a finger in the eye of countries like China and stuff like that. But it obviously seems real appealing to folks who are like, God, income tax sucks,
Yeah, I would say this is an apolitical point that is objectively a very stupid idea. It's not supported by the lack of enforcement we see in tariff regimes currently.
Yeah, every company would leave. Nobody would do business in the United States anymore because it's that easy to just shift it and say, all right, cool.
But it sure is a nice, shiny political object to dangle out there for folks that maybe don't do their homework. Right? I appreciate you guys, offering that perspective, but it does seem like the kind of ditch effort, policy point that maybe would get some people's eyes lighting up. Ooh, no more taxes. Wow, that sounds awesome.
The best that could happen is you could reduce the percentages of income tax, but there's almost no way. I don't, whatever. I'm not a politician, but I don't see how you could ever do that, considering the spending that the United States is like the ramp that it's currently on and has been on. How do you reduce that?
Also, the president has no power over that nature of legislation. They can make speeches, but
shiny political objects.
Yeah, but objectively, that's sideline mascotry, which I don't know is a word, but I don't know whether it's a word, but it's American English. Also, shout out to Ireland. They've been making headway as a tax haven, so this would be very helpful to Ireland. Maybe we should get our citizenship. But anyway, you're right. There are a lot of obtuse statements. And again, just to be very clear, when we're saying something is objectively a stupid idea, we would say the same thing if any presidential candidate proposed something that wackadoo.
Oh, 100%. No, I appreciate the very, nonpartisan perspective, because that's all I was asking for. And I think that's just, it's a fascinating thing to trot out there, especially given what you just said.
What if we turn the whole of the United States into not American free zones, but just one big Freeport? You know what I mean? Roll the dice. Let's see how it goes. Everybody tries not to overpay in taxes. The U.S. tax system is a whole bag of badgers, but we know that tax avoidance techniques become more sophisticated the more money you have to begin with. So I would argue that for the upper echelon of the wealthy, these tax avoidance techniques are on the level of sorcery. This is like financial wizardry. There are accountants who make more money than you will ever see in your life, and they work just a couple months a year.
Mm-hmm. Well, in not art dealers, art liaisons, maybe goods liaisons, people who sell goods via the Freeport, who pretend to be the owners of objects and property.
Subtenants, yeah, brokers.
Yeah. Well, that's a whole thing we can get into, but it's part of this. I mean, it's part of the financial crimes. It's you don't, in most free ports, you don't have to have an end, like who is the human being that actually owns this property?
Right. And who is the human being at the other side of the table?
Yeah. You just got some people who are talking about selling some art for $95 million or $111 million. And then it does change hands and it all happens there, but nobody knows who sold what to who.
I'm not the CEO of Discordia LLC. I am the liaison between IGU and Discordia. And then I can forward the email if you would like, customs, but that's going to take 8 months minimum, by which point I may have another job with a totally different shell company, but I will still be here.
Yep. And it's often for a broker like that to make 2% on a sale, 2 to 5% on a sale, which means, let's say it's $100 million sale. My God, you're a millionaire. You just made one sale.
Exactly. And then you take the rest of the year off. Nice job, bro. These free ports play a huge role in this financial sorcery because they are a genuine way of rigging the market. And it can become so surreal and absurd. We talked about this in our previous episode, The Fine Art of Money Laundering. You can have an artifact change hands multiple times, and the price can increase with each iteration. So it gets more and more expensive, more and more money in play there on the craps table. But that actual artifact may never physically leave the single storage room. It's almost like speculation when people were trading in oil futures and the oil was just left in the same ship off the coast.
Yeah, and it's so weird because often the initial contracts for goods that go into a free port are for several months. And at maximum, they're like 6 months or something like that. But then they get elongated and negotiated up to several years. And then sometimes, depending on the free port, it can be a permanent storage facility, basically, or a storage facility within the Freeport system that is another private service.
Right. And they're still finding stuff stolen by the Nazis in European free ports. That's how long it can stay in that parking spot.
Well, 1888 is the Geneva free port, right?
Right.
So
yes.
That's the biggest one around. And there's something crazy, some statistic that was in a 2016 New York Times article. The Louvre, is that how you say it?
The Louvre
has at the time, 2016, had around 350,000 pieces of art in it, right? But then this one Freeport in Geneva had 1.2 million pieces of like serious art stored in it.
Well, is it just frozen in time, though? How does appreciation and depreciation work in that case?
Well, I'm glad you asked. In our earlier episode on the fine art of money laundering, it's dystopian level free market stuff. The piece of art or the artifact, whatever it's like, the materials used to make it don't matter. It's how much a willing seller is ready to sell it for and how much a willing buyer is ready to pay for it. So if you have connections with a terrorist organization and you need to move, say, $30 million, then just buy any old piece of fine art. Don't even move it from the Freeport. Now, congratulations, you own a Matisse or a Goya or whatever that you never have to see.
It's so weird. There's a great example of this exact kind of thing that was in Town and Country, boys. A little Town and Country article. I don't know if you guys remember.
Yes, of course. I've long had a subscription to Town and Country.
They low-key have some great reporting.
Oh, absolutely. There's some reporting from 2015 about this guy named Yves Bouvier, who was one of these art go-betweens.
Bouvier, of course.
Yves Bouvier.
Yes.
And he was working for this Russian oligarch. I don't even know how to say his name. Dmitry Rybolovev. And he was working for this guy as an art go-between. And the oligarch found out that he was overpaying for all of his art just over a dinner conversation. So just to give you some numbers here, there's this one piece of art, Modigliani, I don't know what that is, but some masterpiece was sold to this Russian oligarch for $118 million. And then he found out that it was actually only worth $93 million, and that's what it was sold for. But this go-between dude was charging like $25 million a pop for the transactions.
There's one thing rich people hate is overpaying for stuff.
Or paying for stuff.
Oh, yeah, exactly. But the whole point of that is that the masterpiece, they were charged $25 million more for it. So when it was spoken about or when it was written about, it was sold for $118 million.
That
it was
becomes
actually
the price.
only, exactly. So It's kind of that thing, that speculation thing that Ben was talking about with oil prices, that it just kind of just goes up and up and up every time somebody pays a little more for it.
And is that a feature, not a bug, perhaps, in this type of situation?
It very much is, because it's setting precedents. It's jurisprudence is another word to say it. And this leads us to the next big problem, which is money laundering. The world is full of people and organizations that have made a ton of cash doing a lot of dirt. We're talking human trafficking, evil drug stuff, slavery, terrorism. In some cases, rogue nations get slapped with what we call sanctions, which prevent them from engaging in the international political and economic order. So how do we make the money move? We do a bigger version of a Breaking Bad car wash scheme. First, you set up a shell company. You make a series of shell companies, and preferably you span these out across international borders, because the rules for corporate governance change country to country, right? So you spread your breadcrumbs wide, and this helps throw off the stench of your dirty money. Then you move illegal funds through the international system to kind of slowly wash it. We call this trade-based money laundering. And the weird thing is, this sounds so small time for international, like Spectre level evil organizations. But the weird thing is, often they're selling cigarettes and alcohol and like knockoff handbags in weight through these Freeports. And then you do this legal parkour where you cook the invoices, right? Or you over or under deliver the stuff you agree you're going to deliver. And then no one on either side has a problem with it, because the buyer and the seller, once you get through the proxy companies, they're the same group. So they're just moving their money.
Yeah, you can convert money into whatever you want, right? Like, it doesn't have to be actual luxury goods. It could be just like pogs, whatever it might be. And it's just a way of like temporarily converting it to something and then, converting it back.
Yep. Back in the day, a lot of this stuff ended up funneling through Panama and Swiss banks. And we've done episodes on that stuff too, where
Panama Papers.
It all kind of functions together.
Mm-hmm. It's a big laundry is the problem, or the advantage, depending on who you are and where you're at. We see that there's a lot of people, or there are a lot of institutions that are trying to raise awareness about this. There is a steep divide, a precipitous chasm between the people who are against Freeports and the people who are for them. And I want to shout out this group called Comply Advantage, who monitors this and provides different analytical and security services. They had a great example of what we just outlined. They said, all right, if you're reading this and you're an authority trying to keep your Freeports clean, which is
good luck.
Right. It's Sisyphean. It's sort of ocean versus a bucket of water, but good hustle, guys.
Right. So just and by way of an example here, the first beneficiary of a multi-million-dollar credit line, I guess, or a letter of credit is to supply medical goods for another country's Bureau of Health. But the second and final beneficiary of the credit issues invoices that don't match the first ones. This is, I don't know, it seems very much like a classic mafia type scam, almost like a no-show job kind of thing on The Sopranos, right? Or like you're billing extra for like goods and services that actually don't cost what you're billing it for, and you're disguising things that way, right? And these kind of mismatched invoices. So the first beneficiary is revealed to have substituted invoices that were marked up by 300%, exactly like I was just describing, and additionally revealed to have a connection with the firm acting as its agent to the Bureau of Health. So the go-between is in on the deal and facilitating it to benefit the first party.
There's some stuff in real estate that happens that's very similar to that.
100%, and continues today. And in any of these cases we're outlining, if you don't look closely enough, and Freeport's heavily incentivized not looking closely enough, if you don't, this looks like everyday international business. Worse, it looks like the boring stuff. You know what I mean? Now we're just selling loose cigarettes and Discman or something. But the issue is smart criminals like boring stuff. One of the best neighbors you might encounter in Atlanta, or at least personal experience here, was the guy who owned the local drug operation. Made sure Halloween was safe for the kids, was basically an unofficial HOA, intervened in crime and petty theft, repeatedly sent over what I will call drug enthusiasts to mow my lawn for free. Just anything to keep scrutiny of law enforcement away.
That's right. That's why, people kind of seem get off the mark significantly when they act like, all drug dealers are all illegal enterprises, are just chaos in the streets, blasting away, causing, the quality of life for those around to just decline. I mean, of course, there are examples of things like that with cartels, of course, but it's not it's not the smart way to run an illegal operation. It just isn't. The best way to do it is to actually watch people's backs and, do like Pablo Escobar did, where he made sure that the people who were surrounding him where he lived loved him and protected him and treated him with the respect you would usually reserve for a monarch or a political figure.
Real G's move in silence like lasagna. That's from Lil Wayne. I would also say I think Gus Fring legitimately cared about the chicken.
Is lasagna silent because it has a silent G?
Yeah. Real G's moving silence.
Cool. Just making sure.
Nice little bar.
I get it. The G's. Sorry. God, that's clever. That's very clever.
I think he probably came down between Real G's moving silence like bologna or Real G's moving silence like lasagna, and he went with the more mobster of the two.
Absolutely. It's also, I would argue tastier. Unless you're a big bologna person, but never been my thing.
Oh, now we're going to get an email about bologna lasagna.
No, thank you.
I'm open to. I don't know.
Or there is a fancy bologna is more or less like that mortadelle kind of the real fancy cold cut of that is essentially just fancy bologna. So I guess it's all in what you're looking for.
And then there's another thing, not necessarily even financial crime, but what we foreshadowed earlier. It belongs in a museum. People are looting artifacts and putting them in Freeports and kind of waiting and cooking till they get the best socio-political environment to move these to private collectors, like things you cannot put a price on, or perhaps to get a good deal with a museum. They're stealing. It occurs often in war, like in times of turmoil in ancient, troubled areas of the world. Like the Middle East is huge for this.
So in December of 2016, authorities in Switzerland seized cultural relics that had been looted from several Middle Eastern countries, including Yemen, Libya, and Syria, that had, up until that point, been stored in Geneva's Freeport, which is home currently to billions of Swiss francs worth of fine art and other, treasures, including the world's biggest, most valuable wine cellar.
That is true.
Yeah, how can you store a wine cellar? That seems like I guess it's just all packed up. Maybe it's
just climate controlled, baby.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. That's all you need.
You got to be the cellar. You know what I mean? So the European Union did this investigation on this. You're absolutely correct. It was a huge crackdown. And they found that 3 of these pieces, at least, were from a UNESCO World Heritage Site that the Islamic State had been destroying. Because we may recall not too long ago, the Islamic State or various factions thereof were super centered on destroying things that, like, if you're human listening now, they were destroying your stuff, like the marks of your ancestors, the story of human civilization, erasing all of it. And looters, despite their maybe fundamentalist leanings, they like to make a little bit of coin, a couple euros. So they hid this stuff, shipped out via cutter to Switzerland. And the Middle East is also big on Freeports. This launched a new crackdown, and the Swiss government, when they reacted, they went pretty hard. They're trying to remove all the typical advantageous or attractive parts of a Freeport. Like you were saying earlier, the idea is now, if you are what's called a tenant, there are like 200 something tenants in Geneva for their Freeport, you have to have an independent firm of specialists, a third-party firm, investigate the provenance of your relics, and then you have to tell them who is really making money and who is really buying it. And then the craziest part, the most like Christopher Nolan part of it, they have to submit to a, quote, biometric system that'll track your individual movements through the Freeport. So you can't, because what used to happen is people would say, hey, I work for company A, and they might actually work for company A. But when they get past, the barbed wire and everything, they go to their other job, company B. And that's where they help the, drug cartels make money.
Yeah, but it's so weird to me, though, because that's one Freeport in Geneva, because they had issues and they kind of had to deal with it. There are thousands of other Freeports out there that don't have this. You don't need an ultimate beneficial owner or UBO, and nobody ever got to know about you, whoever you are. Thank goodness weirdly enough, thank goodness this terrible thing happened, because at least it's going to bring some transparency to one Freeport.
Keep it on the low. Anyway, yeah. So you're absolutely right. It's bigger than hip hop, right? It's deeper than rap. This is a systemic issue. It's a conspiracy that is working for a lot of powerful people, and it doesn't stop just at the billionaire who doesn't want to pay taxes. It doesn't stop at the evil character in an Indiana Jones film. Each of these Freeports has a great deal of autonomy, and the rules in one place are not the same as the rules in the next. And it touches on war, which we'll talk about. What is it good for? Freeports. After a word from our sponsors.
And we've returned. War, it never changes. And it's not good for anything at all. Absolutely nothing, right? No, to your point, Ben, before the break, it is very, very good for Freeports.
And weapons manufacturers and people who like to extract resources for profit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Switzerland, again, it sounds like we may be picking on this country, but they were, they're very big in the world of banking secrecy, or were for a long time. Neutrality, also very big in the world of Freeports. So
I thought you were going to say watches.
And watches, yeah.
Chocolate.
Watches, chocolate, overpriced sandwiches. I said it. I'm not going back.
Cheese.
But, so the war in Ukraine, the Russian invasion of Ukraine, which was a slow boil, I think we can all agree, and is currently continuing now. We don't have to get in the weeds on it, but we know that this part of the fallout of this is it resulted in Switzerland having to face scrutiny over handling Russian assets. As of 2022, the Swiss government went back on its historical neutrality laws. They froze $6.33 billion worth of Russian assets. They confiscated 11 properties. They took sanctions against Russian individuals and various shell companies and proxy entities to follow the European Union. And to be clear, Switzerland is not part of the European Union. They're just they're buddies, the way that sometimes other people rap with the Wu-Tang Schengen area.
Yeah, totally.
So the issue is that even if you are the government of Switzerland, you're like Swiss passport control, your Swiss customs, you are still going to have problems getting into these free ports. That's nuts. That's like being the president of the United States and they say, you can't go into this building.
You know who I am. I'm the president of the United States.
I'm picturing security going, a president. If we let one of you
buddy.
in, there's going to be like 40 more immediately.
Sorry, Mr. President. This is for Skull and Bones members only.
Exactly. And this was a historically big move for Switzerland. One of the things that might sound strange is the idea that they're taking action against specific Russian individuals. That may sound prejudiced until we realize that post-communist Russia is a kleptocracy. The very well-to-do oligarchs of Russia, and there are oligarchs all over the world. The U.S. has several. The very well-to-do oligarchs are representatives of Russian state power. Like they don't wake up every day and say, I wonder what I would like to do with Gazprom. They take their orders. They are an unofficial government. So targeting those individuals is targeting the Russian state. And then we have probably this is a very weird thing to say, but the hottest debate or the hottest conspiracy juggling about free ports now, at least in the West, concerns the United Kingdom.
Oh, yeah, because of Brexit fallout, right? Because it was sort of a debacle. Didn't work out the way anyone thought or hoped or expected, or maybe exactly as it was intended. So the idea of free ports, I guess that it makes them more important in order to claw back some of that capital that was lost in instituting this catastrophic plan. I mean, I don't know. Again, it's up in the air as to whether you think there's anybody, Ben, or Matt, I'd love to hear it, that benefited from Brexit, or if it was just in general just sort of like a dumb nationalistic move that shot everybody in the foot.
I don't have enough information to give you a clear answer there. I do know that there's some weird Freeport stuff going on in the UK. There's a brand new one. There was news about it, from this month, June, like a couple days ago. What is it called? The Fourth Green Freeport. Mm-hmm. It's officially open for business as of June 12th.
They've reduced their environmental footprint.
Yeah. And they're going to do it more with this Fourth Green Freeport, apparently, because it's going to be focused on all kinds of things like hydrogen, offshore wind, sustainable fuels, modular manufacturing.
Matt waved his hands when he said modular manufacturing.
But it's that thing we're talking about where you are encouraging outsiders essentially to come into this Freeport so that their private company can bring stuff in, manufacture it, work on things there, and then the UK will make money afterwards. Scotland will make money.
Doesn't it just go to show how little the actual consumer is regarded in all of these things, all of these goings on, when you see what we get, the occasional tax-free holiday, or whatever, like the ability to write something off on our taxes, etc. When you have these just massive tax loopholes that are designed not to benefit us, but to benefit the folks that, are charging us for all of the goods and services and things that we, rely on and or enjoy.
I'm drinking out of a paper straw like a sucker. Been compromised. Yeah.
Glass containers.
Right. Exactly.
Well, you know what I mean, though? It's like what we get, the amount of quote unquote tax grace that we get as individual humans is just a joke compared to the things that are available and accessible to the larger, profiteers in these situations.
Black Monday Murders is right. Well, except for the magic part. But yeah.
Because it has nothing to do with us overall. It has to do with the GDP of the country or the gross value added amount or whatever the other economic numbers are that they come up with. It's
definitely gross, that's for sure.
GNP. Shout out to Bhutan for gross domestic happiness.
Yeah,
which is
dude.
Still a weird one.
But just this example, this Fourth Green Freeport in Scotland that just opened up, right? Everybody in Scotland who is of a certain economic level or thinks about the country of the United Kingdom and specific areas of Scotland and tax dollars and all that stuff, they believe that's going to bring in around $700 million in private and public investment every year for the next 10 years. So like $7 billion that they're going to make.
And also, a great deal of the public in Scotland was not aware of it. If you read like the Scotsman.com and other articles, you'll see that the public didn't know what was going on for a great deal. And, is that a bug? Is that by design? Scotland is its own place. It's got a lot of other stuff going on. It's easy to miss the boring news.
Well, yeah, and the politicians will talk to the public about it. The economic specialists will talk to the public about it and say things like, it could generate up to 38,000 well-paid, quote, highly skilled green jobs, with nearly 19,000 of these being direct gross jobs linked to target sectors and tax sites. But what they're not saying is, if this is private investment, or a lot of it's private investment, and it's a company coming in to do business through this Freeport, are those jobs coming in from other countries where human beings are going to have work visas from other countries? Or are they hiring people directly there?
That goes to the question we'll get to at the end, which is, do these actually work?
Well, yeah, and I hate to keep harping on this, but like things like stimulus, they have measurable results. And I mean, it's an economic move that some would argue, stimulus does increase spending and it's an injection back into the economy, and it's ultimately good for the big picture. But there's so few things that are like that actually benefit the consumer directly. And with the sheer number of these types of tax havens and loopholes and Freeport situations that are out there, I sure would hope that it would benefit the big picture in some way, right? It has to.
Well, it's the old advertising thing. Are we selling a product or are we selling a story? And I would argue that to the vast majority of the public, Freeports, the public approval of them is based upon selling a story, which is not. We'll get to the idea of whether they work, but for the background, Freeports are not by any means a new idea in the United Kingdom. In the age of Thatcherite austerity, there were multiple Freeports set up in the 80s, including Liverpool and Southampton. They were phased out later in 2012, but the UK government post-Brexit said, we need to bring these back. And again, that chasm of divide we're talking about here, the people who are pro-Freeport tend to be private businesses, high-net individuals, and the politicians who call those entities masters. The people against it tend to be a well-informed public and all the nerds who are paid to objectively look at it. The Office of Budgetary Responsibility over there in the UK said, look, the tax breaks we're giving these folks and these Freeports are proposing, they're going to cost us £50 million sterling a year. They said that in 2021. Quick ballpark math, that's about $63.4 million US dollars per year. They also said, we're not really making anything new. We're taking economic activity from other places. We're taking jobs from other places. We're just like cloud seeding. We're not making rain. We're moving moisture. And it may be to the detriment of other people in this large interconnected system. And then also, boom, just one last mic drop, they don't actually work. Freeports don't work the way that they are sold to the public as working.
Well, and just to double back on something that I believe Matt or Ben, you pointed out earlier, these do create jobs. Right.
Well,
so if there's a silver lining at all, maybe that's one of them.
I would say they create jobs to run the Freeport the way an airport creates jobs to run parts of the airport. Right. That's a thing. You got to have people to make it happen. But when it comes to creating jobs for specific companies that are coming in, like the private investment they're talking about, it's a maybe situation at best.
Yeah, and all jobs are worthwhile endeavors, right? It's tough to get one, it's tough to keep one, but there is a difference between high-paying jobs and low-wage jobs. And the argument here is that a lot of the Freeports, due to the inherent nature of the way they're structured, they will move jobs, at least, but they're often going to be low-wage jobs, aka not what the public was promised. Also, they're moving stuff around. Again, they're not necessarily creating higher skilled jobs that would change the fortune of an economy. You know, you don't have to look far to see examples of quote unquote foreign investment or private public partnerships that do not benefit the communities in which they are created, right? But then the question is, if they might not work in terms of what the public's promised, but if you're the guy trying to clean the money or the person or the entity trying to clean the money, and Freeports are great. They work perfectly. Why change it?
I don't make more of them. And so we can move our stuff to other Freeports and just keep on moving it.
Always in transit. You know what I mean? Keep on trucking.
So, I mean, surely we're not the only one making these observations in terms of like what good are these to the average, citizen? Like what are the benefits? Do they outweigh the shenanigans that are happening? Are there any moves being made towards, maybe clamping down on these things a little bit, since they have been kind of compared to shady banking deals?
Yeah, in Europe, at least, just about 4 years ago, the European Union clamped down on around 82 Freeports. And they said, look, all you have been doing, you've been helping some economies, but you haven't been helping the economies of your country. You've been helping the economies of terrorists and money launderers and organized crime. And those are, spoiler, not the people you said you were going to help with this whole experiment.
Yeah, or individual, literally billionaires.
Yes.
Like that oligarch we mentioned earlier who's just keeping hundreds, if not more, priceless objects and just waiting to offload them when the time is right.
Mm-hmm. Just seriously, Monty Burns style, steepled fingers going, these lab-grown diamonds may become an issue.
Yeah, I'm telling you.
Yeah, and shout out to the EU, because they're making that move because they concluded what we had talked about at the very beginning of this evening's episode. They said these Freeports are essentially becoming the sketchy banks that we had so much trouble with earlier. And the game of international financial regulation is the game of whack-a-mole. You kill one institution or you make it honest, then another one springs up in its place. It's even worse. It's like the old myth about the Hydra. You cut off one avenue of dirty money and two more spring forth. So what will replace the Freeports? I don't know. Something is being done, but the question, maybe the real final question here is, will any legislation make a difference in the face of all this money? It is so much money. No one knows how much money it is.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't see it happening. Because let's say you shut down all the European Union Freeports. Guess what? The people who are using these, they got shipping on lock. They've got yachts. They've got stuff to move some stuff around.
Guys, it just occurred to me. You know what else is another good Freeport that's in pop culture and literature? Interzone in William S. Burroughs' Naked Lunch is a Freeport.
Oh,
and it's like kind of a hive of scum and villainy type situation that evolves around there. And we haven't really talked much about what life is like in these Freeports, but that is how it's depicted in Naked Lunch.
Very nice. Oh, Ben, I think I have an answer to your question. If they shut down all the Freeports, what do they replace it with? Moonports.
Oh, I thought you were going to say Dave and Buster's. All right. Moon and Busters. Yeah, let's do it. Do check out also our episode on mysterious holes. We promise that makes sense, right?
That's just where they're going to keep stuff.
A loophole is a mysterious hole, I guess, technically.
We promise we only get childish maybe half a dozen times, probably less. It's a great episode, actually, I would argue.
Shh, this is my wine cave.
So, right. Please visit me at my port. Don't worry, it's free.
It's full of port. Fine port is what I keep in my free port.
And something like this will inevitably continue because most of the public is never going to personally encounter this outside of scant references in fiction and film. We would love to hear your experiences. Help your fellow conspiracy realist out if you have boots on the ground with shady international dealings. And heck, if you work in a Freeport or free economic zone, please tell us the stuff they don't want you to know. We try to be easy to find online.
Well, yeah, like what's it like? What's the setup like? I'm picturing, the way an airport operates or whatever, but I just want to know, like, if you do work at one of these, describe a day in the life of a Freeport employee. I think that's fascinating. You can find us, at the handle Conspiracy Stuff, where we exist on Facebook, where we have our Facebook group. Here's Where It Gets Crazy, which you can join and get in on the conversation. We are also Conspiracy Stuff on X, FKA Twitter, and on YouTube, where we have video content rolling out every single week. Betcha we'll do something Freeport related one of these days very soon. On Instagram and TikTok, we're Conspiracy Stuff Show.
Hey, do you like to call people? Call us. Our number is 1-833-STDWYTK. Tell us what happens when an airplane runs into your Freeport. Also, tell us what you want us to call you, what your nickname is. And then you've got 3 minutes. Say whatever you'd like. Just let us know if we can use your name and message on the air. If you got more to say than could fit in that message, why not instead send us an email?
We are the entities who read every single email we receive. And yes, by the way, when you look in the mirror in the dark, we can hear you. Conspiracy@iHeartRadio.com.
Stuff They Don't Want You to Know is a production of iHeartRadio. For more podcasts from iHeartRadio, visit the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows.